Kidnappers stand aside, trembling in fear, and the girl offers them to catch a scorpion in exchange for bread and milk. Tito, with trembling hands, unties the girl so that she can help them. Taking up the gambling sticks, Dorothy catches the scorpion, not understanding how the two men could be afraid of it. The kidnappers ask the girl to take the scorpion out of the house, and as Dorothy climbs the stairs, she realizes that the house is underground. All the way, she cannot understand why they let her go alone so easily. But when she leaves the house, everything becomes clear to her. Wherever she looks, it is absolutely impossible to understand where she can run, because there is an endless desert around her. Dorothy sits and chews the promised bread and milk. She is waylaid by the kidnapper, whose name turns out to be Danny, and suddenly Tito bursts into the room. The girl hears criminals behind her discussing the news that a princess has disappeared in the capital. Dorothea is annoyed that someone from the castle let slip about her disappearance, and now the kidnappers will not leave her alive. Otherwise, they will not survive themselves. Realizing that she will not receive help from the emperor, Dorothy decides to take the situation into her own hands, and when the kidnappers leave the door, she sneaks up to the closet. Finding Danny's bag, she pulls out a knife, deciding that this should be enough to defend herself. Hiding behind the door, Dorothy listens as Danny sends Tito to find the camels and takes upon herself the murder of the girl. Realizing that her fate is sealed, the princess realizes that she has no choice but to use this knife. Entering the room, Danny discovers that the girl is not at the table and tries to find her. Dorothy runs at the kidnapper from behind, holding a sharp knife tightly in her hands. Jumping as high as possible, she swings and brings the tip of the knife down into Danny's shoulder. Having struck, Dorothea realizes that she is very weak and the wound was not deep enough. The man turns around and violently grabs the girl by the throat, lifting her off the floor. Danny pins Dorothy against the wall with just one hand, and she completely loses her balance and ability to defend herself. Holding her down with one hand, he knocks the knife out of her hand with the other, and it falls to the floor. Dorothy has no strength. The kidnapper screams at her, and gradually anger overwhelms the princess. She gathers strength and pushes the man in the chest with her feet, pushing him away from her. Danny falls, and Dorothy, without wasting time, grabs the fallen knife and wounds him in the leg. He asks to have mercy on her, and she remembers this look. The look of a man who looks at a monster. Remembering her promise to herself to be kind, Dorothea whispers to her captor to just leave her alone. She turns around and goes out along the already familiar route. Dorothy leaves the house and looks at the desert into which she will go, with the only desire that everyone will leave her. The princess walks forward straight where her eyes are looking, and the sun is already beginning to set. It has gotten dark, and Dorothy is scared of powerlessness, because there is not a light in the desert, and she cannot even control the spirit of light. Tired, the girl lies down right on the sand and seems funny to herself, because even at such a moment, she thinks that if Ray were in her place, he would have already been saved. Opening her eyes, Dorothy realizes that she has been lying there unconscious for some time. She looks at the stars and suddenly notices a light moving in her direction in the distance. Hearing the clatter of hooves, she gathers her strength and rises from the ground, regretting that she did not die. However, the desire to live overcomes the desire to die and, rising to her feet, Dorothy desperately waves and calls for help. The girl's strength doesn't last long, and she falls face down into the sand. Through her closing eyelids, she sees approaching people in knightly uniforms and hears the hubbub of voices addressing her. Opening her eyes, Dorothea sees the vague outlines of a familiar chandelier overhead and realizes that she is in her room. Suddenly, she hears the emperor's voice and sits up on the bed, listening. Behind the slightly open door, she sees her father and nurse, who tells the emperor about how she and the princess were attacked. Dorothea is touched that the emperor came here for her sake and because she was almost killed. However, the next moment, all feelings collapse as she hears her father complaining that they are a lot of trouble. The emperor orders the nurse to find the one who gave out the information and officially refute the rumors about the abduction of the princess. Dorothy sits on the bed and thinks that even despite her good behavior, her father still does not love her. The princess believes that everything that happens to her is a punishment for being a tyrant in a past life. A few days later, the imperial physician informs Dorothy of her weak condition, despite the drop in temperature. Next to the doctor stands a maid, whom the girl sees for the first time. Dorothy is upset when she realizes that her wet nurse was fired, because she knows that what happened was not her fault. The nurse always took care of the princess, and now she had no choice but to hope that the woman would be all right. In order to quickly recover from the shock, the doctor advises the princess to go on vacation to a quieter and more peaceful place. The girl is invited to go to the domain of Sarishan and suddenly she realizes what a great opportunity this is. After all, now she will be able to leave the palace and move away from Carnan, Ray, and Theon and Julia, who will soon go to Episteme. Having decided for herself that there she can gain strength, Dorothea declares her intention to go on vacation. There is a knock on the door, and Raymond appears on the threshold with a bouquet of garden roses for his sister, as he did every day after the abduction. The prince learns that Dorothy is going to go to Cerithian by the sea. He is sad and does not want her to leave. Raymond feels guilty about Dorothy's kidnapping, but she tries to convince him otherwise. To dissuade the princess from leaving, Ray offers to help her enroll in Epistemia. The prince does not know that Carnan ordered Dorothy to refuse to enter the academy and continues to persuade her. Realizing that he is doing this out of good intentions, the princess insists that she needs treatment. Raymond, whom tired Dorothy asked to leave the room, looked sadly at his sister and left. Only a few days have passed, and the princess is already ready for the journey, grateful to Carnan for his indifference, because of which she leaves the castle so soon. Suddenly, the girl is distracted from her thoughts by someone's voice that addresses her. Turning around, Dorothea sees a smiling Theon in front of her, who reports that he learned about her trip. The princess reluctantly answers him, because now she did not want to see him at all. Theon reaches into his pocket to take out the gift he had prepared for the princess. The boy hands Dorothy the sweets he brought in case the princess gets seasick on the way. Theon is upset that he will not be able to see the princess often, but hopes that she will soon recover and return to the capital. In her previous life, Dorothy did not feel anything like this. It seems to her that Theon likes her, but she drives these thoughts away from herself. The princess turns around and hurries to leave as quickly as possible. She is embarrassed by these thoughts. Looking after her, Theon clenches his hands into fists, with the hope that he and the princess will definitely meet again. Sitting in the carriage, Dorothy convinced herself to be cool and not give in to her feelings. However, she cannot get the thought out of her head that he took care of her and brought her sweets for the trip. And so Dorothea stands on the balcony and listens to the sound of the sea, breathing deeply, as soon as she left the imperial palace. Here, in this place, there is no trace of her being a tyrant, and perhaps this is where she can start all over again. In the Ceritian domain, the princess is looked after by the castle's maid, Carla. She also introduces Dorothea to the knight Stefan Greenwall, who is also appointed to serve under the princess. The girl looks at him and recognizes him as a knight from her past life who reached the rank of vice-captain in the best order of knighthood, and she took his life. Dorothy looks at him and realizes that if he is now 18 years old, then he has just joined the order, and instead of being promoted, he is assigned to her as a guard. This makes Stefan seem unhappy to Dorothy, and she extends her hand to him as a sign of her respect. In response to this, as a sign of friendship, the knight slaps the princess on the palm. Sitting in her room, Dorothy decides to write down a list of criteria for a prosperous life. Scratching the paper with a pen, she catches herself thinking that she herself does not understand what it means to her to live a prosperous life. She decides to ask Clara, who brought her tea and cookies, for advice. The maid believes that first you need to obey your parents, but this criterion does not suit Dorothy. Looking into the princess's notebook, Clara sees that the girl is about to write a wish list for a prosperous life, and begins to laugh. Angry with the maid, the princess orders her not to be laughed at. Clara convinces the princess that she is not laughing out of malice, but because she thinks what Dorothea is doing is cute. To begin with, Clara invites the girl to start smiling more often, and Dorothy understands that until now she has not yet had a reason for this. But the first thing that comes to mind when thinking about a kind person is a smile on his face, and so Dorothy tries to smile. However, after a couple of seconds, out of habit from pushing, a cramp passed through the princess's lips. Dorothea pushed the servants out of the room, saying that she needed to think. Taking a pen in her hand, she begins the list, and the first item for her is to learn to smile in a friendly manner every day. The second point Dorothy writes down is not to look at other people's things, and remember that the throne belongs to Ray, and Theon belongs to Julia. By the third point, the princess undertakes to save 1 million people, and vows to hear words of gratitude 3 times a week and donate money to charity every month. After Dorothy finishes writing, she looks over the list to make sure that this is enough for a successful life so far. Tired of sitting at the table, the princess, stretching, goes out onto the balcony to listen to the sound of the sea. She informs the servant standing outside the door of her intention to go out for a walk to the water. Despite the fact that Dorothy wanted to walk alone, Stefan still follows her, but he walks silently and does not disturb her. Suddenly, in the distance, the girl sees a man sitting on the beach with his knees propped up. She is surprised that someone else lives in the vicinity. Coming closer, she sees a blond boy, whom she recognizes as Eden Bronte. In a past life, he was the main